Hi guys, my name is David Graham and I'm an intrapreneur. Well, that sort of sounds like I'm at an AA meeting, right? But actually, to me, an entrepreneur is not a position. It's an identity. It's a mindset. It's a way of working. And I've been an entrepreneur in a couple of major companies over my 15 years of career so far. Been 5 years in the aviation business. It's a very hard place to do innovation. I've been in the wind power business. It's a very capital-intensive place to do innovation. For the last 8 years, I've been with Lego. And in various different positions, but always as the guy who's been driving the more radical part of innovation. The person who's been saying, hey, wait a minute, things are really changing. Maybe we need to look at this as well. Or maybe we should do things in a different way. The challenge is, though, that that's really, really a hard work. That's a hard position to take. Because there's a lot of resistance. And I'm going to talk about what is it that drives that resistance and how do you overcome it. And so Lego is no exception. There was resistance there as well because, well, the company is doing great and have been for the last 15 years. It's actually seen more than 500% growth in the last 12 years. That's hard to come up with an argument saying, we should change. No, it's going really well. But you know the reason why. And that was the same argument I made. Well, the thing is that the world is changing radically fast, right? And radical is the new normal. And what does that mean? Well, it means the time you have from something is radically new in the market till it's a mainstream commodity gets shorter and shorter. So the time you have to recoup your investment as a pioneer gets shorter and shorter. And the time you have as a second mover, and most big corporates have a second mover strategy, they're sort of sitting and waiting until somebody else does something, and then they move in. But that gets almost impossible. You have no time to catch up, because this is not just about discovering the next product or service. This is about changing the way that you operate. Your operational models, your business models, your way of working, the type of people and mindset that they have. And that takes years to change. You can't just sit around. And I put some of the things up here that are changing the toy industry. And it's all the usual suspects, right? Because it's artificial intelligence. Because imagine what happens when the toys can actually learn and think based on the interaction that they have with a child. And if you add then robotics to it, now the toys will actually move and behave the way that the kids would imagine them to. And if you add sound and voice, the children will now be able to have a conversation with the toys. And if you then add Internet of Things and connect all the toys, now the toys can actually play together. So imagine the child leaving his bedroom and the toys are still playing together. It's like Toy Story is coming to life, right? And then on top of that, you can augment the world that the children are seeing through mixed reality. And now the stuff they imagine will come to life right in front of them. And on top of that, you can even empower them to produce their own physical stuff when they can start 3D printing it. And that's definitely changing everything about the toy industry. And for somebody that produces plastic bricks really well, we're super skilled in molding, that's a big challenge. And despite the fact that it's going really well, this can change very, very fast. And I think the question to ask here is not so much what's going to change and when, because that's really, really hard to foresee. And you can sit and wait for the right technology to come, or you can bet on a technology and then it's not ripe anyway. So the right question really to ask is, how do we take a lead on this change? How do we not become run over by this, but someone who takes a lead? And this is not just about not getting disrupted. This is about taking a moral and ethical responsibility as well. Because all these technologies can do great things for kids, no doubt. It can really empower them. It could make them more creative, more inspired. But it can definitely also do the opposite, right? It can completely pacify them. Because what this can do is that it can create all the great things that they used to imagine. Now it's happening right in front of you. And it's so beautiful, so polished, that there are no cracks or gaps for them to fill out. It can derive them for their creativity. And in fact, when you're looking at something called the torrent scores, which measures how creative people are, then the new generations of kids have the lowest scores ever measured. That means they are the least creative of generations to come out. That's really, really scary, especially when we compare it to the needs of the future workforce. They need to be more creative than any other generation. So that's a huge dilemma. And why is this? It's because of passive consumption of digital media. They're spending too much time at over-glossy, perfect things. And it pacifies them. It sort of hooks them into the matrix, and they just need to, be and consume. So Lego has a big responsibility and will take a big responsibility saying, how do we make sure that these technologies are actually beneficial for human beings? And we need to humanize the leverage of these technologies. And I believe that responsibility goes for all companies. How do we leverage these new technologies in a way that's actually beneficial for human beings long term? And with all these changes, there's only one way to go about it, and that is to experiment. You need to start trying things out. And in a way, you need to become sort of the scientist and have the scientist mindset. Because what a scientist is doing is constantly asking why, and be curious about, if we do this and this, then what will happen? And it's a known fact that the biggest inventions from scientists comes not from their hypotheses, but from the mistakes that happens along the way. The stuff that wasn't supposed to happen, that's where the big invention lies. So how do we cultivate that mindset of the scientist? And I believe that's going to be a core capability that any organization will have to adopt in the future, regardless of industry, the ability to experiment and explore. But there's a challenge. Or you might say, what is the challenge? Why are big companies not brilliant at experimenting and exploring? Well, they should be very fit for it, right? They have all the resources, they have all the capabilities, they have all the talents, they have all the assets. Why aren't they great at experimenting and exploring? There's a challenge. And that happens when corporates then grow up, become big, they stop experimenting. And that's actually the same thing for us as adults, right? When we grow up, the older we get, there's definitely a tendency that we stop experimenting. We stop exploring. We start sticking to the things that we know. And we grow deeper and deeper into the comfort of what we can do and who we are and what we know. And that's the same thing that happens with big companies, and there's a couple of challenges for it. One is that the bigger the company get, the more they look inwards, into their own world. Because what they're basically creating is a universe of themselves. And it becomes a stronger and stronger internal power. They start looking outside. They stop looking outside. But the second problem that's even bigger, and it's something that we feel in our personal lives as well, is the fear of failing. The fear of misstepping. The fear of not being right the first time. The fear of not being perfect. And that goes for big corporates because they're getting more and more policies and PR departments, etc., and the brand, they need to protect the brand, and they get very, very frightened for anything that looks like it's not perfect. And that's the same for us in our lives, isn't it? When we grow up, as an adult, we don't dare to be wrong. We don't dare to say or do something where we're not 100% sure that this is probably right. So how do we overcome that? How do we cultivate that? And we should actually be good at this. Because as children, we did nothing but experiment. That's the way that the children learn and develop and grow. Otherwise, they wouldn't learn how to talk, how to walk, how to do anything. And when a child tries to stand up and falls over, as a parent, you don't go and say, well, that's a failure right there. I mean, I hope not. No, you go and say, way to go, try again. And you encourage that learning that comes with trying new things and having to learn that and having to have an accelerated learning path. So we need to adopt that mindset of being the parent, or being the child, actually, of saying, how do we constantly learn something new? Because if we don't, we know this, We become rigid and stuck. Individually in our lives, but also as companies. And when it happens to a company, they might die. And we're seeing this. And in fact, a recent study showed that 72% of all the Fortune 500 companies existing today, and that means basically all large companies in the world, will no longer exist in 10 to 15 years. That's very scary, not only from the company's perspective, but from a societal perspective, because that's a lot of jobs. I personally don't believe it's going to happen, but there's some truth in it. These companies need to adopt these new ways of working, or they won't make it. And that makes it really hard for entrepreneurs, right? Because these are the guys in the company saying, wait a minute, something is happening over here. And they're fighting a fight. And what they're fighting is basically the immune system of the existing organization. It sees these radicals and rebels as something that needs to be cleared out. They're disturbing and destructing what we're doing. And what typically happens to entrepreneurs is one or two things. Either they give up and they do as they're told, or they burn out and leave. And quite recently, they don't even start. We're seeing the new millennials and Gen Z workforce. They don't want to work in these big companies. They don't want to get stuck in a silo. And many of them, when they actually try to do it anyways, they leave with stress after just 2 years. And that's after finding their dream job. So there's a challenge as well with actually attracting the future workforce and the future talents. So I believe companies in the future will have to become ambidextrous. And what does that mean? Well, ambidextrity means you can use both hands equally well. And it's actually quite difficult for most people. For companies, it means that with one hand, they need to be able to manage the existing business really well. Exploit the resources, exploit the market you build up and everything. But with the other hand, you need to equally well explore the future business and build and invest into that future business. And right now, the scale is such that most companies do 99% existing business, 1% sort of randomly new exploration. Well, that needs to change and shift. So I believe there has to be 3 levels of innovation happening in an organization at any point in time. First one being obviously the existing core business. That's where most companies excel. Lego is brilliant here. We do the brick business. We make more money than anybody else in the toy industry per product. Our margins are insane because we're so efficient. That's good. You should be good at this. And it's constantly continuous improvement and upgrades. Second level is where you do core exploration. And that's basically, you're still focusing on the same operating model and business model, but you're innovating. Radically, you could say, on that. For Lego, this means adding digital to our core business. How do we digitize the brick system? How do we make this system bridge into the digital world? Still a big challenge. More and more companies are moving towards this, building innovation labs, building innovation capabilities, working more agile in the company itself. Third level, however, is really challenging for most companies. And that is where you do radical exploration. That means when you move beyond your existing operating model, beyond your existing business model, and you have very few capabilities in that space. And I believe the first 2 levels you can easily do within the existing business, within the mothership. Third level, you cannot. Because again, the immune system of that existing business is going to kill it off. That is too radical, it's too different. We shouldn't do that. So you should build new businesses outside of the existing business. And that means over time that the company form, an organization will change from being these very finite, huge giants, typically vertically integrated, to becoming more ecosystem of multiple entities that are working together. And many of these new entities are basically your future business. And either you're investing strategically in them with capital you have in existing startups, or you're building your own startups, which can be driven by your entrepreneurs. And the mental model obviously is thinking big and starting small. And this is easy for a startup because they don't have the resources to do anything else but start small. But for corporate, it's actually a challenge. Because executives have a tendency that, if you want something badly solved, you throw a lot of cash at it. And with a lot of cash comes a lot of resources, a lot of people, a lot of steering committees and SVPs, and all of a sudden you have a project that's too big to fail. And they are the most toxic thing you can have in an organization. Because they can basically havoc through the organization for years without anyone daring to shut them down. And when you finally shut them down, it's a very traumatic experience for everyone. Hundreds of people are laid off, and everybody's saying, let's never do that again. No, instead you want to make it as small as possible. Least amount of resource, least amount of time, least amount of money. How do we learn this new field? How do we understand this new space? And move into that, becoming more like a startup. The second thing you need to cultivate is empathy. And that's typically not something you associate with organizations. It's more the opposite, actually. But empathy is needed because that creates the necessary sensitivity to understand the changes that's happening. And there's a reason there's a lion on this image, because at Lego we say, if you want to understand how the lion hunts, don't go to the zoo, go to the savannah. And it means you need to go to the natural habitat of where the changes are happening, because that's the only way to develop empathy. You need to expose yourself to the changes and really feel it. Yet most innovation labs, they're really good at reading reports and Googling. And so how to really get out into the field and understand these changes. And when you have done that, you can start building clear opportunity spaces for where you want to go. Again, the opportunities are so many. There's so many directions. You need to focus, figure out what are the most suitable areas for us to move into, where we can still leverage some of our resources, some of our capabilities, some of our assets. How do we build the bridge into that space that helps set direction? From there, it becomes about building these prototypes and prototypes, and we actually call them prototypes. That's where you pretend to have a prototype. And why don't we use the word prototype? Because if you tell an engineer, a designer, that they should build a prototype, they will start building something that actually works. And that'll take anything from weeks to months to maybe even years. No, we want something done really, really quick. And this is an example from IDEO, where they had to create an app for kids for a client. And instead of hiring in coders and saying, let's start coding, let's start building this, no, they printed an iPhone on a phone board, carved out a hole where the screen is, the phone board is hanging from the ceiling, the guy's standing behind, she's in front, she's recording with a laptop, and when she's poking, he's responding. And in just 2 hours, they had recorded the first 2 to 3 conceptual directions for this new idea. And in the subsequent hours, they had kids in and tested those directions. And in less than half a day, they already knew what are the key directions and input from the users on this idea. And I know many innovation labs and teams that can spend 6 months getting to the point where they actually start testing the stuff that they are thinking about. And that's a huge waste. So at Lego, we work in 2-week work cycles. And that means on the Monday of the first week, they build the hypothesis. They say, we believe that if we do this and this, then this will happen. But we don't know. So we have to test it. So they quickly built the prototype, they test it with children, and on the Friday of the second week, they evaluate that, and together with the leadership team, they decide what should happen in the next 2 weeks. And this means that any team can only run in the wrong direction for maximum 2 weeks. And that's extremely powerful in terms of your resource spend. And much of this is actually about de-risking, right? Because you're moving into unknown territory, you're investing into something you have no idea if it will ever give a return. And that's the problem that the executives have. They're looking at it and saying, ooh, very risky. You de-risk it by working in this way. And then it never becomes a failure, because it's so small, these iterations. Also, what we did a lot of was saying, we don't have the resources, we don't have the capabilities to do these new things. Let's partner up with someone who does. Let's distribute our innovation power in a much bigger community of collaborators. Startups, vendors, individuals, working much more with staff on demand. Not hiring people in before we really know if we need. Do we need an AI engineer? They're very hard to get and they're super expensive. Let's partner with a company first for the first many years to understand How much of this do we actually need as a core capability of our own? And obviously doing small pilots. And again, the smaller the better. Spending less time, less resource. It's not about getting turnover. It's about getting learning and understanding. And that's the main point. Don't try to get it right the first time. Aim to learn. But that's really, really difficult for corporates and adults alike. We want to get it right the first time. We want to be perfect. So how do we break down this thinking? How do we dare to expose ourselves and be vulnerable? And it's of course tied also to how we measure things in companies. We need different KPIs and different ways of measuring this that are more focused on building learning and new capabilities than short-term turnover and profitability. And that's a mindset shift for most executives in thinking like that. But for instance, experimentation velocity is a great new KPI because that measures how fast are you understanding new territories. And look at these teams like explorers that are venturing into new worlds. And to begin with, their maps are completely dark. And what they do is that they put light on these maps. So you start understanding the world anew. And the quicker they are able to do that and harvest the learning and understanding, the more successful they are. And that is what is rewarded. Not if they're providing another $1 billion within next financial year. Let me just show you a few cases, one case actually on a project that we did at Lego where we had to use this thinking. And it was actually my personal first task and challenge when I came into the company. And it came with the fact that over the years, when the company grew and was very successful, another group of people also grew besides the kids that were using the products. And we call these AFOLs, adult fans of Lego. And they're actually in the millions around the world. Adults that are using Lego bricks for a number of different things and reasons. And many of these are actually really skilled people. Fact is that in the AFOL community, there are more than 10,000 PhDs. Half of them probably working within space or rocket or these, I think most of NASA is part of this community, in fact. That means really brilliant people. And they have their own ideas. They have their own ideas about what Lego products should be in the world, inspired from maybe their own kids. And they can build it because the Lego bricks is such that you can imagine your own products, right? That's the great thing about the product. So these fans would be starting to build their own products. And there will actually be a market for these products. Many people would be interested in buying the products that the fans were creating. So if you go on Etsy, which is the world's biggest site for homemade products, you'll find thousands and thousands of products clearly looking like Lego in some form or the other. And when I started looking at it, half of them was clearly infringing the brand. So my first meeting was actually with legal and saying, okay, what do we do? And they say, well, if we had 500 lawyers in 5 years, we could probably do something about it. But most likely it'll be killing the brand because these guys are our biggest fans. And they're just so much in love with it that they want to see other ways that it's being leveraged. So we said, okay, because the traditional corporate way would be to say, shut it down. We said, okay, if we can't beat it, how do we collaborate with these guys? And at the time, we were actually looking a little at what Apple, so this was just at the time when Apple came out with its first iPhone and iTunes. And it was interesting because they were sort of saying, well, we have the iPhone, we have the App Store, and they could have chosen to say, we know what 20 apps you guys need. We develop those, you use them. But instead they said, we don't know what it is actually you want, and we're not the best people to build it either. So why don't you build the apps? And we just provide the platform. And that was a smart thinking, I believe, the core of why Apple is successful today. So we said, what if we did the same thing? And said, you know what products you want, we just provide the platform. So we came up with the idea that we pitched to management for Lego Ideas. And by the way, this is before Kickstarter, just to let you know. But it works like Kickstarter. It's basically a platform where you can pitch your product idea on the side, but Lego won't look at it. The community will look at it. And you need minimum 10,000 supporters, and a supporter is a person that's willing to buy the product at a specific price point if launched before Lego looks at it. But then we are committed to launching 3 to 4 projects from this platform every year in global distribution. And we'll give 1% of the turnover back to the idea originator. So we presented this idea to management, and they said, absolutely no way. 2 main reasons. We got the best designers in the world. They know what products are great, not these A4s. And at that time, the management were thinking about A4s as being sort of 35-year-old males, single, living in their mom's basement. Really the geeks of the world. And now we all know they are the billionaires of the future, right? But it was quite stereotypical at the time. We knew, however, there was a much larger professional audience around this. Second problem was that all the great ideas now will be posted online, free to steal from all the competitors, right? All the ideas will just be freely available now on a site. We don't want that. And there'll be IP infringements and confusions and all that. So we said, okay, how do we de-risk this? How do we make a small pilot? How do we make it so small and insignificant that no one can shut us down? So first decision was to, let's not build this. We don't do it. We find someone who already have it. Let's go to a market where we can isolate it. So we chose Japan, because Japan was a well-established Lego market, but everybody speaks Japanese, and not a whole lot of English, at least not at the time. So we launched it there. We launched it through a small company called Elephant Design, and they already had a platform like this, because in Japan, way before the US made their Kickstarter and stuff, had been doing this for years, actually, within their arts and crafts community, empowering users to co-create products with the companies. So we put it on there. We called it Kuso, which means wish in Japanese. So it wasn't called Lego, but it was Lego products. So people looked at it and thought, well, that's a fan who made this. And that was fine. That was what we wanted, the arm's length distance. We launched it. The first product on the platform was this one, Shinkai. It's a real submarine, Japanese-made. It's the only submarine in the world that can go down to 6 kilometers depth underwater, manned. And it was a national pride of the whole country. So it was one of the engineers on the project actually that posted it, and we launched it with 0 marketing, and it became the best-selling item in the Japanese market ever. And that was because everybody bought it. Kids bought it, engineers bought it, parents bought it, even submarine enthusiasts bought it. So this proves, okay, there's something interesting about this platform. Not only is it a great way to engage with the fans, but maybe there's a new business model. So we got permission to launch the international platform, and we were looking for a great product, and we were lucky because the first one was Lego Minecraft. First one to come on, just after 3 or 4 weeks of launching it. And if you know Minecraft, it's an online game we were built with square blocks, a little like Lego, but just digital. And at the time, there were 80 million active users on the platform, 80 million. So we were looking for 10,000 supporters. In 24 hours, we had 400,000 supporters. More than 4 million people visited the site in those 24 hours. The servers crashed 3 times. And we went from 0 to 4 million users in overnight. That was crazy. We launched this 6 months later, only 1 SKU, 0 marketing, only distributed through 1 channel, the small company behind Minecraft, the Swedish company called Mojang. And it sold so well that we had all the big accounts from around the world, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Toys R Us, call our executives and saying, guys, what are you doing? Why are you not giving this product to us? And the executives didn't even know about it. It was like, small pilot somewhere, I don't know. It became a full product line after that, more than 25 SKUs. And for the last 5 years, it's been in the top 3 of the growth drivers for the company. So that caught the attention of management saying, okay, there's some power in opening up and including the bigger community in our innovation process. Now, just as an example, we launched a couple of other products as well, Back to the Future Ghostbusters. And no kids knew what that was when they were launched, right? We know, but still they sold amazingly to adults. Because there's still these massive fans, groups of fans and communities with a high conversion rate, really loving these products. Another benefit from this was both we got all the data from the users. We knew exactly who the users was, those that were following, those 400,000 that voted for Lego Minecraft. We knew who they were, where they were living, the age they had, the professions they had. So we had a way stronger market segmentation going right out of the gate. But also it was empowering the users to become the marketeers. There was zero spend on marketing on these. And that's very good in a time where the traditional marketing vehicles are failing, where TV commercials are no longer working because there's no flow TV. Okay, now I'm going to round it up. So the key results from this was know-how, capabilities, and culture ahead of time. This was not just about launching a platform. This was about changing the culture and mindset of the company to open up, accepting that other people are working with our assets, that we are part of a bigger ecosystem and community. So these are powerful pilots. Finally, guys, I'm just going to recommend for you to be the rebel in your organization and challenge. Don't take no for an answer, but be diplomatic about it. Because it's easy to set things on fire. It's harder to make people follow once you've got a great idea. So here's the top 5 advice on intrapreneurship. And the first one is to accept the resistance. It will be there. And it's a natural human tendency. It's the fear of the unknown. What will happen to me and my job and my position if this happens? What if I'm not part of this change that's happening? Understand that that's a prerequisite going in. Second is to only break the rules you understand. Yes, you should break rules, but it's great to understand them. Because when you understand why these rules are there in the first place, you understand the legacy, you understand the history, you understand why people are behaving the way that they are. And that will empower your narratives and your stories around how to overcome and build the bridge into that new future. And you need to do that because you need to build a tribe. You need to see your project not just as a project or a product, but as a movement, as something that's changing the company. And that means you need people from legal, finance, procurement on board as well. And you need them to join this movement of saying, this is going to create an entirely new company. And to do that, you need to write love letters, quite literally. You need to be very diplomatic and humble. Don't be an idiot, basically. And it's also about showing respect. You are standing on the shoulder of giants looking into the future, and it's the current business paying your salary, right? So if you're respectful about that, they're going to also be more willing to join you. And finally, you make other people shine. You make sure that all those that were part of this project that's been supporting it, even those that were against you to begin with, reward them. Make them shine, because then they'll come back for more. So you want to become diplomatic rebels. Thank you, guys. Thank you.